There is a particular silence that arrives when everything you thought you were supposed to be has finally crumbled. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of a man sitting in a garden watching birds. It is the silence of a room at 3 in the morning when the job is gone, the relationship is broken. The plans you made when you were younger feel like someone else's joke, and you are sitting there with nothing but the ugly truth of what your life actually looks like when you strip away the performance. Most people run from that silence. They fill it with noise, with distraction, with another drink or another scroll or another conversation that means absolutely nothing. But there are a few, a rare and stubborn few, who sit inside that silence and refuse to blink. Those people, whether they know it or not, are standing at the edge of something real. They are about to enter the strongest phase of their lives. And the strange, almost unbearable irony is that it looks nothing like strength is supposed to look. Charles Bukowski knew that silence better than anyone. He lived inside it for decades before the world decided to pay attention. He worked post office windows for years, drank in rooms that smelled like mold and cigarettes, loved women who left and women who stayed, and both kinds hurt in different ways, wrote poems on paper bags when he had nothing else, and somehow, through all of it, never stopped being exactly who he was. Not because he had found some secret formula, not because he had achieved anything the world would call success by the time he was 30 or 40, but because he had stopped pretending, he had stopped performing. He had looked at the ruins of his life and decided quietly and without ceremony that the ruins were honest, and honesty was the only thing worth building on. That decision, that single terrible and liberating decision, is what Bukowski's entire body of work keeps returning to. And it is also the invisible door that opens when a human being enters the strongest phase of their life. Here is what nobody tells you about strength. The world sells you a version of it that looks like certainty, like control, like a man in clean clothes walking into a room and knowing exactly what he wants and how to get it. That version of strength is a costume. It is performed for audiences. It collapses the moment the audience leaves. Real strength, the kind Bukowski spent decades writing about without ever calling it by that name, begins when you stop needing the audience. It begins when you realize that most of what you were chasing was not yours to begin with, that someone else handed you a list of goals when you were too young to question it, and you have been running that race ever since without ever asking whether you actually wanted to reach the finish line. The first sign that you have entered the strongest phase of your life is precisely this. You stop running, not out of laziness, not out of defeat, but because you have finally looked at what you are running toward and realized it was never yours. Bukowski wrote about work the way other writers write about war, with the same exhaustion, the same dark humor, the same recognition that something essential in a human being gets ground down by the machine, slowly, daily, in ways so ordinary that most people cannot even name what is being taken from them. He wrote about men and women showing up to jobs that did not want them, doing work that did not need them, collecting paychecks that barely kept them from the edge, and going home to apartments that smelled like old food and silent desperation. And yet, buried inside all of that, there was something he insisted on finding, a small, stubborn flame, the refusal to disappear entirely, the decision to write the poem even when it paid nothing, the decision to stay awake when everything in the environment said that the only decent thing to do was to stop caring. The second sign that you have entered the strongest phase of your life is this refusal. It does not announce itself. It does not feel heroic. It feels like stubbornness. It feels like stupidity. But it is neither. It is the core of what Bukowski understood better than any motivational speaker ever could, that survival, real survival, is an act of defiance. And defiance, when it comes from something true inside you, is a form of art. There is something here that I want to stop and acknowledge, directly, because it matters and because I think you already know it on some level. If you have made it this far into this video, chances are you are not someone who is doing fine. Chances are you are carrying something heavy, something you have not been able to explain to the people around you, because the words never quite come out right, or because you have tried and they looked at you like you were being dramatic, or because you have learned over time that some weight you simply carry alone. That particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of being misunderstood or unseen, is exactly what Bukowski spent his whole life writing about. So if you are sitting with that right now, I want you to know that this video was made for you specifically. And if you want to say something, if you want to drop something in the comments below, I want to invite you to write this. I am still here, and that is enough for today, because it is. And because someone else scrolling through those comments, someone who is having the worst night they have had in months, needs to read those words from a real human being. Your comment is not just a comment, it is a lifeline for someone who does not have the words yet. The third sign of the strongest phase of your life is that you begin to lose interest in impressing people. This sounds simple. It is not simple at all. The desire to be seen favorably by others is one of the oldest and most powerful drives a human being has. It shapes the clothes you wear, the opinions you express, the stories you tell about yourself, the dreams you pursue or abandon. When that drive begins to quiet, when you find yourself genuinely indifferent to whether a certain person thinks well of you, it can feel like something is wrong. It can feel like depression, like withdrawal, like a kind of social numbness. But Bukowski understood it as something closer to the opposite. He understood it as clarity. In his work, the characters who suffer most are not the ones who have failed by conventional measures. They are the ones who have internalized the judgment of others so completely that they no longer know what they actually want. The liberation, when it comes, is not loud. It arrives in quiet moments. A conversation where you say exactly what you think and feel, no anxiety about the reaction. A choice made for no reason other than it felt true. A morning where you do not check how you appear to anyone. The fourth sign is the willingness to be uncomfortable for long periods of time, without interpreting that discomfort as a sign that something has gone wrong. Bukowski's life was uncomfortable by almost every measurable standard for most of its duration. He was broke, he was unknown, he was rejected by publishers for years. He lived in conditions that most people would consider uninhabitable, and yet he kept writing. Not because he had decided that suffering was noble, not because he was performing stoicism for some imagined gallery, but because the alternative, abandoning the thing that made him feel most alive, was a discomfort far greater than poverty. There is a distinction here that almost never gets discussed, the distinction between suffering that is destroying you and discomfort that is refining you. The strongest phase of your life is often indistinguishable from a very hard time, precisely because it involves sitting with discomfort long enough to learn what it is actually made of. Most people flee before that knowledge arrives. The fifth sign is that your relationship with time begins to change. You stop counting years in terms of achievements and start measuring them in terms of what felt real. Bukowski never chased milestones. He chased the next line, the next honest sentence, the next moment where language did exactly what he needed it to do. His famous late blooming, publishing his first novel, at the age of 49, is often cited as inspiration. But the more important story is not the arrival of success. It is the decades before it, when he wrote without expectation, without an audience, without any guarantee that any of it mattered. That relationship with time, patient and stubborn, and stripped of urgency, is one of the most profound shifts a human being can make. When you stop racing against an invisible clock set by other people's expectations, something in you begins to breathe for what may feel like the first time. The sixth sign is a deepening tolerance for solitude, not isolation. Not the kind of aloneness that comes from being cut off from the world against your will, but chosen solitude, the deliberate act of spending time with yourself without filling that time with noise or performance or the need to be witnessed. Bukowski wrote almost always alone, in rooms, at night, with a typewriter and a drink and the radio sometimes, and he returned again and again in his poems and prose to the way solitude strips you back to what is actually there. He was not romantic about it. He did not pretend it was always comfortable, but he also never mistook it for failure. The person who cannot be alone has never fully met themselves. The person who enters the strongest phase of their life begins to understand that their own company is something worth cultivating, something honest and strange, and more interesting than most conversations will ever be. The seventh sign, and perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, is that you begin to find meaning in the small and the ordinary. Not the extraordinary, not the peak moments, not the highlights you would show someone to prove your life was worth living. The small things, the coffee that tastes right, the particular quality of light through a specific window at a specific time of day, the satisfaction of finishing one true sentence. Bukowski built an entire literary career out of the conviction that these small things were not minor, that in fact they were the whole substance of a life, and that most people walked past them every day chasing something larger and louder that turned out upon arrival to be hollow. When you begin to feel that the ordinary is enough, not as resignation, but as genuine recognition, you have arrived somewhere that most people spend their entire lives looking for without ever finding it. What Bukowski understood, and what took him decades of living and writing to articulate in ways that cut through, is that strength is not the absence of damage. It is not the absence of doubt or failure, or the kind of loneliness that sits in your chest on a quiet Tuesday evening when you cannot explain to anyone exactly what is wrong. Strength is continuing. Strength is sitting at the table and writing the next line when everything in you says the next line is not worth writing. Strength is looking at your life without flinching and deciding, not with optimism, not with delusion, but with something harder and more durable than either, that you are going to keep going anyway. That is the phase you are entering, or the phase you are already in without having a name for it. And the fact that it looks nothing like what you were told strength should look like does not make it any less real. It makes it more real. It makes it the only real thing. If this reached something in you, if some part of this felt like a conversation you needed to have, do something small for whoever else needs to hear it. Leave a like on this video, not as a favor to an algorithm, but because the person who is going to find this video at 2 in the morning in 6 months, the person sitting in their car outside an apartment they are afraid to go back into, deserves to find something that tells them the truth. Your like is part of how that happens. And if you want to be here for more of this, if you want to keep building a language for the things you feel but cannot always name, subscribe to this channel. Every video here is made for people who have been through something, who are still going through something, who are tired of being sold easy answers to questions that are not easy. You belong here, and whatever you are carrying right now, you do not have to carry it without a vocabulary for it anymore.